never claimed that I understand how Bernie Wrightson renders in ink, but let's have a look at 3 essential techniques that I think are fundamental to understanding the genius of Wrightson. Atmospheric perspective, shadow shapes or silhouettes, and line direction. With atmospheric perspective, the idea is that the elements that are furthest away from the viewer on the picture plane will be lighter in weight and rendered with fewer discernible details. You can see in these images, the elements in the background are a lighter tone with fewer details. Or here, in the third image, with the background fading into shadow, achieving atmospheric perspective in reverse. You can practice this by shading simple shapes. Here on my values chart are spheres, inked smaller and fainter as they get further from the viewer. You just use less pressure on the nib or a smaller size tip pen rendered with less details. For shadow shapes, well, silhouette is an element drawn in a single value, either solid black or all white. A shadow shape is similar principle rendered in the same tonal value in the same gray. Silhouette technique can communicate information at a glance. When well executed, it explains a composition to the viewer without distracting from the main subject. The small trees and shrubs in the middle plane are silhouetted in reverse from the background, and here the trees in the backdrop are shadow shapes. Wrightson uses this effect in various ways to keep the emphasis on the storytelling. Line direction. This is the most fascinating of the Wrightson style. He uses a continuous stroke effect in the gradation of tones, transitioning the shading of each element seamlessly in the composition. Pure wizard. I picked images that are less complex than his Frankenstein illustrations. These are scenes from when he illustrated Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf in 1983. If you're wondering, I bought the Kindle version. The link is in the description along with other supplies that I used in this video. This is a Tashikawa G-nib. G-nibs are typically super stiff. Tashikawa has a wider range of line quality, thin to thick. It's a medium softness, but it's still quite rigid, which I find more suited to a scribbling style than for precision work like this. Anyways, it's just a sketch for this study, and I'm focused on atmospheric perspective, using light pressure on the nib for the elements that are less defined, such as the background and the foreground mist for the eerie mood of this horror story. I'm using the background and overlapping objects to frame the elements. The shading then acts as the contour lines, where there are no contour lines at all. My pencil sketch was minimal, so I did get a little lost with the abstract nature of this section. Despite this, the atmospheric effect is there, so my practice session is still on track. For the second study, I chose a landscape from the same book. This time my focus is on the shadow shapes for the elements positioned further in the picture plane. As well, for this piece, Wrightson calls attention to his wizard line direction technique for transitioning tones from light to dark in the composition. I've never tried this before. Fingers crossed that it turns out okay for YouTube. I switched to a Browse Steno 361, the blue pumpkin. This nib is rated as a soft medium, so it's high flexibility and medium elasticity. It gives us a soft but springy mark-making experience. I began the ink application with the blades of grass in the forefront. They have a contour line, so that's a little easier. The trick for accentuating the overlapping effect is to add weight as a drop shadow under the blades standing in the forefront of the picture plane. To reinforce the illusion of depth, the layer of blades behind is thinner, with the thickening of shadows from the weight of the boulder. As I move closer to the fence, the light comes through and the wood pattern emerges from the blades. The marks are spaced further apart in the areas of highlight. I want to keep working from left to right because I'm right-handed and I'm getting some smudging from skipping around the picture plane. how Wrightson achieves that tonal gradation with his line work. This is my very first attempt. I think it's best to layer it gradually, as long as the strokes are all slanted in the same angle. With the background base layer in, I went ahead and added the line work for the shadow shapes of the trees. Right. Well, that's it. I hope that you enjoyed this quick study of a couple of Wrightson landscapes. There will be more in the future because he's my very favorite.